Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Saurabh Gupta. He's a cardiologist and physician executive. Today's Kevin MD article is Physicians Must Lead the Vetting of AI. Saurabh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate being here this morning with you.
All right, let's start by briefly sharing your story, and then we'll jump right into your Kevin MD article.
Of course. So I'm a cardiologist by background and training. And within cardiology, my focus and interests have been in innovation and cutting edge therapies. So, for example, me and my team did some of the first transcatheter valve procedures on the West Coast way back. And then leading on from that, I'm now on my third startup.
Excellent. And what got you into that healthcare startup space? A lot of physicians, of course, don't get that training when they're going through medical school and residency. So what initially got you interested in that intersection?
Absolutely. So mostly curiosity and the ability to impact more than what I was able to do one patient at a time, which is the most rewarding thing in the world to be able to do. But then how do you scale up and how do you solve the bigger challenges in medicine? And also my core belief that clinicians are ideally positioned to be at the forefront of innovation when it applies to the healthcare sector, whatever vertical you might add.
All right, and it's an exciting time in the health startup space. Of course, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. Your Kevin MD article is Physicians Must Lead the Vetting of AI. For those who didn't get a chance to read your article, tell us what it's about.
So it's about my evolving thinking on that AI is now very, I wouldn't say intrusive, but really that might be the word that a lot of my friends have mentioned to me in all aspects of clinical medicine. I mean, scheduling systems are running on that, billing systems are running on that, increasingly ambient learning systems are running on that. And that got me thinking about what is the background architecture that supports these tools to be vetted? Are we applying the same level of rigor to these that we might otherwise apply to other therapies? For example, you take medical devices, they have a 10 to 15-year life cycle of development, and sometimes for good reason. And fast forward to that, then there were some conversations on during my role on the board of governors of American College of Cardiology on what should be the framework for vetting these. And then, as I mentioned, my belief that physicians have to be leading that.
And specific to AI, what are some of the dangers if we don't vet these tools properly in medicine?
So, several. If you go through the article, I've broken those down into four broader categories. So, for example, utility. Is it technology that is in search of a solution, or whether it's actually solving a problem that we as clinicians and patients face every single day? Technical robustness. Is it accurate? Is it precise? Is it as reliable across diverse populations as, for example, some of the therapies that we study are? Is there ethical integrity? Is there evidence of bias, whether it be implicit or just subconscious in these AI systems? And what is the regulatory transparency? Do we understand the logic well enough to explain it to, for example, to a patient when they say, how did you come to this decision, doctor?
So how are we doing? So I know that AI has been in healthcare only within the last few years now. I know we have a lot of ambient AI scribes, for instance, and now AI is moving into the role of decision support. How is medicine doing in terms of integrating AI responsibly into our workflows?
So I think the technology has far outpaced the framework behind it that allows us to vet it. I mean, there's no question about that. You know, for all of our colleagues in modern medicine, every single day there is one or other AI system that is being presented as an option, whereas the framework of vetting behind them are not as well established. Certainly, some of the non-facing interventions are easier targets. So, for example, billing, even though it's important, is a very, very reasonable early use case. But when it starts into what we call predictive AI and deterministic AI, and then perhaps prescriptive AI, then the guardrails have to be very, very strong on how these therapies, and I would use the word therapy here, get integrated into modern medicine.
So you're seeing various AI tools moving beyond the framework, moving beyond regulation, and sometimes with unintended consequences in medicine.
Oh, absolutely. I think the biggest challenge that I've seen and struggle with is the lack of transparency around how these systems work. Because most of us, for example, you take a blood pressure medicine, and mechanistically, there'd been 3 decades of work on, hey, this is an ACE inhibitor, that's the enzyme in the renal system, and now we have a drug. And obviously, you always have off-target effects. But in these AI systems, the pace of technical innovation is marvelous. I mean, that's fantastic. But I worry that behind the scenes, the ability of clinicians to integrate this into their practice in a responsible way is behind.
So how do you reconcile the two cultures? Because on one hand, you have Silicon Valley, which is move fast and break things, and then you have medicine, which infamously moves much slower. But if you adopt that move fast and break things in medicine, patients can get hurt, right? So you can't necessarily have that same culture in medicine. How do you reconcile those two philosophies?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're on the cusp of a huge technical revolution here, and these tools are very powerful and potentially very, very useful as modern medicine just fundamentally restructures around some of these tools. My belief is that we start with doing what we always do. Physicians are ideally placed to do this. Ask introspective and outward facing questions. So, for example, what data train this model? Does it really reflect my patient population? I mean, anytime we read a clinical trial, the first question is this the population that was the population in the trial, the one that we're treating? What is the false positive rate? What is the false negative rate? What's the sensitivity, specificity? Just basic, simple questions. How do I verify the outputs? Is there source verification? Is there data verification that links back to the primary data? And then, most importantly, when it fails, how would I know? I mean, for example, let's take a blood pressure medicine example. When it fails, we know that the patient's blood pressure was not controlled. But with AI systems, that is far, far challenging to infer or to see.
The majority of these health tech startups integrating AI, do they have physician advisors guiding them, or are they purely run by venture capital and technology based leaders that just want to move as quickly as they can?
The basic ethos around technical innovation is exactly what you said: move fast, break things. But in medicine, the consequences of that approach are real. And I see startups in two broad categories. One are technical founders, where most of the time, not all the time, of course, they would have technology that they're then looking for novel applications. And I think domain expertise in that is very, very important. So when physician founders, for example, start off at the inception of these companies, then they're looking at problems to be solved rather than a technology that can solve some problems. So it's a subtle but very important difference. I do think that once most companies get beyond a certain stage, they do bring physician advisors in. But I have seen less of that at the very inception, other than just bouncing off ideas. Like, I mean, every week I have young kids from Stanford or MIT who would approach me and say, hey, I have an idea. Can I just bounce it off you? But I do think that there's something lost in that type of experiential bouncing off of ideas versus an immersive founder at the outset of a tech company. So that does need to get better.
So, in your ideal situation, what would be the role of physicians if they were to be involved with a health tech startup? What would their ideal role be?
Absolutely. So I think we should apply what we already know. And if we have interest, we should pursue it. So earlier on in the show, you'd asked me a question on, well, what did you do? So I approached it the same way as I would approach doing a residency or a fellowship. I basically set out to learn this ecosystem from people who are far better and adept at this. I mean, an idea is not a product is not a company. So ultimately, for something to be impactful, it has to get in the hand of consumers. And here the consumers might be either patients or healthcare. So get involved, learn about the ecosystem. This is not as hard as it sounds, but it does take some learning. It is different from what we do. And then work with the people around you to bring those ideas to fruition. I think some of the most successful ideas in this space and companies in this space are going to come from people who are at the forefront of doing the work.
Now, if a physician were to consider using any number of AI tools into their patient care workflow, and knowing that some of these tools aren't necessarily vetted by physicians, tell us the type of questions they need to ask before moving forward with a particular AI product.
Absolutely. So I think the types of questions that one would ask is what are the data regulatory policies? Where is this data going? What data actually trained this model? How will this perform? And then, frankly, to physicians, where does the liability lie of this tool? And, I was at the Board of Governors meeting on the American College of Cardiology, and this question came up on where does the liability lie with these tools? And that's an active debate elsewhere as well. And the general thinking on this is so think of this as a scalpel, and the surgeon using the scalpel has the ultimate liability and responsibility. So I would say, with the state of AI where it is, recognize what AI does well. And I mentioned the things that AI does well in my article, and areas that it struggles, areas where it might be prone to hallucinations, and then use those case scenarios to have a deeper level of introspection about the software tool. So something as simple as give me a list of all the clinic visits. AI does really good at that type of task. But if you start thinking about more sophisticated questions on what medicine should I use on this patient, now that becomes very tricky.
So in areas like clinical decision support, certainly liability comes up. How about things like patient-facing chatbots? That's becoming more and more prevalent, especially in underserved areas where they may not have access to clinical care. Some people are using these AI-facing tools that patients can use as an initial triage. What about the liability in those?
I think it's an unresolved question in my mind. Obviously, all of them in terms of services and disclaimers at the bottom of the screens will say, well, we're not really responsible for our outputs and use this as you will. So that becomes tricky. And I do worry about patients getting misinformation, or perhaps not as much as misinformation, but out of context information.
Hmm.
Because what a clinician brings to the table is judgment and wisdom and insight. And all AI systems at the present, even the most advanced ones, are lacking in those aspects. So, yes, you can answer simple questions, but I would use those as in what in medicine we call as hypothesis generating activities, and then have somebody who's a trained clinician put that all together. I mean, from a technical perspective, for those of us who've interacted with large language models, you can see how chats can lose context if you have a long chat string.
Hmm.
And obviously, it's not that that problem is completely solved in clinical medicine. You have patients who have 10 years worth of history that's hard to go by, but generally, a skilled clinician is able to parse out the details and the significant encounters, etc. So that would be an area that I would proceed with caution.
So you're immersed in the AI space, of course. Tell us, what do we have to look forward to in the coming months when it comes to that intersection between AI and healthcare?
I think we're very rapidly understanding what the evolution of this space will be, what it can do reasonably well, and what it can do very well. And I do believe that we're moving towards a model very fast where some of the judgment and insights are on the horizon. I don't think they are here yet. And then the human touch in medicine will always remain important. But some of the simpler tasks, I believe, are very, very ideally suited for AI integration. The tougher problem of how do you actually treat a patient rather than treat a disease or treat a keyword search, that we would have to resolve as a society on what does that human touch mean? What does that comforting voice on the other end mean? Now, obviously, no pun intended, AI systems are actually experimenting with that too to provide the human touch, and for example, in mental health counseling. It's a fast moving field, and I think the near future will tell. And then I think in parallel to the technical advances, we have to, as a society, build the responsible frameworks around the use of these. For example, medicine is a regulated profession. Should there be a state medical board for AI systems or a national medical board? I don't know the answer, Kevin.
We're talking to Saurabh Gupta. He's an interventional cardiologist and physician executive. Today's Kevin MD article is Physicians Must Lead the Vetting of AI. Saurabh, let's end with some take home messages they want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Number one, be excited, not afraid. Number two, be at the forefront, not behind. And number three, remember that we as physicians are ideally placed to be at the forefront of these therapies, not behind them.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed the conversation.